What do you want?
Want to make a video? I know you're dead and all, but do you want to do that?
Sure.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay then. The Germans have launched the largest invasion in all of history. 8 million troops, as many as those killed in World War I, marched over the Soviet border. The Soviets were anything but ready, so the Germans advanced deep into the Soviet Union, capturing tons of Russian troops. Almost 1 million Russians were captured in the Soviet cities of Bryansk and Vyazma alone.
The city of Leningrad was put in a siege that would last for 4 whole years. The Germans were on the outskirts of Moscow now. But the thing is, the Russians are a proud people. They're just not going to give up. When the going gets tough, then they just keep pushing through. And that was especially true when the Russians, fueled by love of their country and hatred for the Germans, defended their capital with everything they had. The resulting battle was glorious. It was unlike anything ever seen before.
The monologue was great and all, but we're kind of on time crunch now because I need to go home in 20 minutes. Anyways, the resulting battle became known as the Battle of Moscow, where over 500,000 people died. Meanwhile, down in southern Russia, there was a lot of oil, and the thing about oil is that vehicles move because of it, and tanks are vehicles. So Germany moves its forces down to southern Russia in order to take the oil.
Then the famous Russian winter set in. Hitler was so confident he would smash the Soviets like nothing you've ever seen before, so he didn't give his men winter gear, which you need, especially in winter. So it kind of leveled the playing field a little bit, and gave the Soviets time to regroup and plan a strategy. The Germans just had to throw in the towel and wait for spring.
Meanwhile, in Asia, Japan saw what their good buddy Germany was doing and wanted to get in on the action. But unlike Italy, they didn't act like me and fail miserably at everything they did. So they wanted to expand into South Asia. The problem is, people already own all those islands. No problem. You just...
Wait.
What?
Did you say islands?
Yeah.
But if there are islands, then you need a navy, and the Japanese don't have that.
Don't worry, I have a solution. Instead of getting a more powerful navy, you can just destroy your enemies' navies so that there's nothing left to stop you.
It's time for new technology with Gunner.
Introducing radar. They're long metal sticks that go up in the air and tell you where things are, even if you can't see them. Also, this thing called a radio is here and allow people to talk to people that are far away.
In order to conquer those islands, Japan needs to destroy the U.S. Pacific Fleet, which is the only thing in their way of creating a large empire. So they attacked Pearl Harbor. As a result, the United States declares war on Japan. Then Germany declares war on the U.S. for some reason. But the Japanese attack had one fatal flaw. They only attacked ships. No repair areas, no fuel storage areas, so what was supposed to be a knockout blow only became a small prick. The Japanese began their conquest, and now they are on India's doorstep and giving Australia the death stare.
Back in Europe, winter was finally over. The Germans could continue their invasion of Russia. Remember southern Russia? Well, in order to gain total control of the area, Hitler had to take a city of Stalingrad, which was easier said than done. The Soviets defended the city with everything they had, which meant that the Germans lost a lot of time trying to take Stalingrad, which they didn't even do. The Battle of Stalingrad was the bloodiest battle in history, with heavy casualties on both sides.
During the battle, the Soviets had new breathing room, so they built new factories, allowing them to make a lot of tanks and planes, which they used to win the battle. The Soviets, with their new and improved army, began pushing the Germans back. Meanwhile, to the south, the British had pushed the Germans in Africa back, but then they pushed their pushing back so far back that they almost went back to the back of the Nile. But then, after a decisive battle in the small Egyptian town of El Alamein, the British smashed the German-Italian army.
In West Africa, the Americans and British made landings, so now the Axis were being pushed back from both sides. Eventually, they were finally kicked out of Africa. Meanwhile, in the east, Japan also experienced blunder after blunder. The Japanese tried to take Midway Island from the Americans, but the Americans were prepared, so they inflicted heavy casualties on the Japanese Navy, sinking 4 aircraft carriers. Then in India, Britain and China joined forces, and then attacking Burma in southern Asia. The Japanese were pushed back from New Guinea. It was clear the fall of the Axis was coming.
Back in Europe, the Allies had to figure out what they were going to do next. The British wanted to launch an invasion into Europe's soft underbelly, aka Italy. Ouch. The Americans wanted to launch an invasion from the west, in France. Eventually, they decided to invade from the south. The Allies made landings on the island of Sicily and began moving up toward the heart of Italy. Anti-war riots broke out across the country, and Mussolini was overthrown. The Germans were like, "Nuh-uh, sister," and kept fighting. The Allies kept fighting up Italy, but then the Mediterranean winter set in and everything slowed down. So the Allies began laying down plans for an invasion into France.
The Allies tricked the Germans into thinking they were going to invade from the part closest to Britain, so the Germans moved most of their stuff there. But the Allies were actually going to plan in Normandy. The U.S. General Eisenhower was the genius behind the invasion, and his hard work paid off. On June 5th, 1944. Paratroopers flew in and worked with the resistance members to blow up bridges and cut off communication lines. Then, the next morning, on June 6th, the invasion began. The Americans landed at the beaches of Omaha and Utah. The Canadians landed at the beach of Juneau, and the British landed on the beach of Golden Sword. The Allies were able to push back the Germans, and they were able to make pretty good progress.
In southern France, the Allies landed with no resistance from the Germans, which was great for them. The Allies captured Paris, and France was free. Meanwhile, in Asia, the Americans launched a huge attack on Japan. General MacArthur, who you may remember from our Korean War episode, led an invasion to the south, and the Admiral Chester Nimitz led the island-hopping campaign. The Americans had to capture tiny islands. A few important ones were Saipan, which had a crucial airbase that would allow American bombers to reach the Japanese mainland, and Iwo Jima, where the Americans captured Mount Suribachi, and this famous photo was taken.
The Allies in Europe were making steady progress. The Germans held the line at the Battle of Arnhem, but the Allies crossed the German border. Now they had their guns pointed at the heart of Germany. Hitler became desperate, and he began a huge blitzkrieg in Belgium and pushed back the front line, creating a Belge in the line. The appropriate name, Battle of Belge, was an attempt to push back which the Allies did. The Germans also surrounded some Americans in Bastogne, where the Germans demanded that the Americans surrender. The Americans' commander told the German messenger, "Nuts." When the messenger said, "What does nuts mean?" the commander replies, "It means go to heck."
Hitler had used up all his strength during the battle, so he was unable to defend himself. The Soviets pushed in from the east and took Berlin. In a secret bunker on the outskirts of Berlin, Hitler knew it was all over, so he married his girlfriend Eva Braun, and the two of them bit into cyanide pills, and Hitler, just for good measure, also shot himself in the head after biting into the pill. The two killed themselves. The Germans had collapsed. Japan had not. The Americans launched an attack on the island of Okinawa, which was the island that would allow them to take the Japanese mainland, and they took it, but after heavy casualties for the Americans had two choices: invade Japan, which would cost millions of lives, or convince the Japanese to surrender, which would be easier said than done. It's time for new technology with Gunner.
Since before the war, the Americans had been working on the A-bomb, which is a type of bomb that makes a huge explosions. The Americans drop one, they drop two on Japan, and Japan surrenders. It was over. The 6-year-long war was finally over. Soldiers went back home, people celebrated their liberation. Millions of people were left dead by the war, but people had to look forward to the future. The world, free of war, was now free, booming, and ready to rebuild. For real this time.